you getting the volume going? All right. So we need two, at least two. Grab me one more.
There was one more. I don't know where it went.
There were three when Brian was showing me.
It's probably best just to have one for the moderator and one that gets passed. Otherwise, it's going to be feedback.
That's for you to introduce. And you can hand yours to the moderator.
Perfect.
Can we go ahead and bring everybody up and sit?
Not right now. Not yet. We got a minute.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get the program started. So if y'all wouldn't mind filtering towards the front of the room. Yeah.
People by name in the back just try to come forward.
Hey, Chris Daneski, if you're done with your selfie, why don't you start bringing some guys up to the front, some of these terrific defense innovators. Shannon Centel, you can get another slice of pizza after you tell three of those people to come and take their seats, please. Yes, sir.
I'm giving Dave Smith a review copy, but there's
Okay.
the book I was telling you.
Okay, fantastic.
Came out about 2.5 months ago.
All right, so good evening. My name is Kevin Lantroop, and my co-founder, Brandon Conover, is in the back of the room. Our other co-founder, who turned and ran whenever the work got hard, Chris Daneski, is on this side of the room. And we co-founded the Texas Defense Innovation Forum based off of an idea and probably a couple of beers last November. And the idea was that there's a lot of folks out there that have a lot of enthusiasm and energy and interest, and that's about it, because they also have questions and they have no idea how to connect to this massive monstrosity known as the DoD. And the DoD, Army Futures Command, sitting in this building, I won't give Paul Norwood a chance to correct me, but they're not even really sure how they're going to connect with you yet or what their business model is. And so we're all going to try to figure this out together. But as any seasoned entrepreneur knows, one of the key ingredients to making it work is to have a very well-connected ecosystem. And so that's what this is trying to be, is a very well-connected ecosystem. I want to start off tonight with two big thank yous. First to Capital Factory. Capital Factory is now an official partner and sponsor of the Texas Defense Innovation Forum. They let us use this space. They're not charging me their exorbitant fees that they normally would to have you guys here, and we've got a really good crowd, so they give us the big room, and that's fantastic. I want to thank Cohen Seglius, specifically Tim Furin, who's back over here, who's our generous paying sponsor for tonight's event. So all your beer and wine and pizza and all the other stuff that isn't necessarily on your plates or in your cups, they're responsible for that. So how many founders do we have in the crowd? Founders, or if you're first five in a company. That's awesome. Keep those hands up. Where's Ian Full-Out? There you go. Ian. That's about 50% of the room, so I think I just hit one of the target metrics for our other initial founding sponsor, LMI, because LMI says, hey man, you got to bring early stage companies, you got to bring founders, you got to bring people who have the ideas, who are on the bleeding edge in here, because that's what's going to bring all the cool ideas. What about folks from the customer community? So Army Futures Command, I see at least one. I know they've got a big all hands event going on this weekend. They're doing some this week they're doing some planning. DIU, Zach was here. Zach had to leave because he's having his first child next month, so they've got some things to do with that. Anybody from AFWorks here? Okay, nobody from AFWorks. We got to fix that for the next time. Anyway, so we started this to connect all of y'all to them and to the opportunities so that we could deliver the most bleeding edge technology to the military that we possibly can. I guess Brandon's not going to come up here. So this has been happening for a while. I actually haven't mentioned yet, one of our other initial founding sponsors, Shane Walsh from Aquila Commercial. And I initially, as a startup, you're like, if you've been in a startup, if you've been one of the first few people in that company, you know a couple of things. One, you'll do anything, and two, you don't necessarily know everything that's going on, but you really trust the people that are with you. So Kristen Esky initially brought Shane Walsh and Aquila Commercial to us, and I'm like, commercial real estate company, what's their interest here? But the reality of it is that Shane and Aquila have been propping up and connecting this ecosystem for a long time. They've seen the potential of the defense innovation, of the innovation ecosystem in Austin being kind of turned and pivoted towards defense problems. Another individual who I'm going to bring up on the stage here shortly has also been doing that since about probably 2013, saw the potential of everything that was happening in Austin and said, the Department of Defense needs to find a way to take advantage of this ecosystem and all of these ideas and all of this energy, and that's Joseph Kopser. So I'd like to bring Joseph up for just a minute to make an announcement. Some of you guys may not recognize him. Picture him with a UT baseball cap on.
So everybody give Kevin a big hand. So in about 3 or 4 minutes or less, I want to tell a quick story. And since half the crowd here is military, I'll start it like this. So there we were. So there we were. It was 1998-99 time frame, right up the road here in Fort Hood, Texas. I was a company commander, and the Army was trying, at that time, its most recent attempt at Army modernization, called FBCB2. It was basically GPS inside of our vehicles. As a company commander, my company was chosen to be the first tank company in the Army to install version 2.0. And it was not only so terrible, but it was so terrible that as we were moving forward, the map was so far behind because the refresh was so slow that we could have called artillery in on ourselves. That is how bad it was. So after about the second or third day of testing, I got out of the tank, got down on the ground, and said to the person that was working with me with a clipboard who was asking me questions, they said, well, what did you think of this and what did you think of that? And I said, it's good and bad, but what's your role in this? Are you one of the engineers? And they said, no, I'm just collecting data to send back to the main headquarters. I said, where's that? And they said, oh, about 8 states away. And mind you, I was an aerospace engineer, a computer programmer, busted open that 286 processor they had. And trust me, it was like a 286 processor, and helped them fix the problem on the spot. I've never forgotten that moment that our military, as it has struggled to try to be current and keep up with all the new technologies, is actually falling behind in new technologies because our procurement system is so slow. So no joke, the Pentagon sent me down here in 2011. And that's what I discovered, what you already know, that the combination of military, innovation, tech, entrepreneur spirit, and that can-do attitude was all right here. So it was here that was born the Defense Energy Summit 6 years ago that planted the seed that if we bring all these folks together, we can make sense of it. And you know the rest of the story, I won't repeat that. But now with all these new innovative centers, General Murray has it right. He says that this is like the military trying to be a startup managing a merger and acquisition. And that's hard. So to sort our way through it, I asked the simple question, well, what would it be like if here in the community we had someone who did speak military, who has been part of a startup, who also has gone through a merger and acquisition? And so I'm so thrilled tonight as a partner and supporter of what Kevin and crew are doing with TDIF to go the next step further. And so we're creating Gray Line, which is the company Brett Boyd and I started a couple of years ago. Brett and I created Gray Line to help companies understand, business, nonprofit, academia, that everything's changing so fast that if you don't go that next step out ahead and think it through, all your underlying assumptions are going to lead you down the wrong path. And the track record that we have both in business and in technology and mobility and in all these changing fields, we now want to apply to defense. So Gray Line Defense is going to be that connection between this community, a group that can speak military, but it can speak startup technologies as well as merger and acquisitions, to help you prospect, to figure out what's best inside your company and your technology, understand not what's needed or being asked for today, but to really understand what the military needs in the future. Because innovation is a national security issue. So you can go to our website, graylinegroup.com, or just type in Grayline Defense, you'll find it. We'll connect you together with this ecosystem and help you start planning beyond, to think about how you take your technologies and partner with the military. And for those that are already established working with the military, we'll connect you to those younger, smaller companies with those ideas that are moving at the speed of startup rather than the speed of big companies and bureaucracies. I'm personally thrilled to be partnering with Kevin on this project because we have such opportunity to help our military. Innovation is a national security issue, and I'm asking all of you all to enlist in that effort and to help make it better, not just for the military, but for all involved. I'm Joseph Kopser. Look forward to seeing you as a part of Grayline Defense, and thank you very much for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really incredible to see how far the ecosystem has come since I first came down, I think last July or August, in support of the Army Research Office out of North Carolina. And the first thing I did when I got here was I tried to find the association that can help link me to the ecosystem here in Austin, and none existed. And so I want to give a personal thanks to Kevin and to Chris for stepping up and saying, well, let's figure out how to do that. And tonight, this room, the folks in this room are a testament to that it was a need, that people wanted this type of interaction, that wanted to be in a room with other people trying to figure out how to do work with the federal government. And that's really what our program tonight is all about. So tomorrow we've got a workshop that's going to go into much more detail than what you're going to hear tonight. So tonight, I think Tim told me we're going to touch on the wave tops, and tomorrow we're going to go pretty deep. So we actually have a few spots left for an in-depth all-day workshop tomorrow. So if there's really, it's open to anybody. If there's anybody in the room that wants to learn more about what you hear tonight, then please talk to Kevin at some point tonight before you leave. We do have a couple of spots left for tomorrow, so a very immersive workshop-style experience. There's Kevin, in case you didn't figure it out yet. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to our moderator tonight. Very happy to have him with us, Patrick Wern from I'm going to make sure I get it right because it used to be TARDEC. So it is the DevCom Combat Vehicle Systems Center.
Just one more thing. Just remind them, if you are already signed up to come, the room is right here.
Okay.
At 9 o'clock. If you're in this area,
Who's signed up? See a show of hands? Excellent. So some of our companies are signed up for tomorrow. So we are meeting here tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I'll try to find some breakfast tacos. Apparently that's important here in Austin. So we're going to go. Yeah, I see a lot of yeses. So well, very good. What's that? Taco Deli. All right. Make a note. Well, thank you all. We'll get started with the program tonight, and I'll turn it over to Patrick to introduce our panel.
Well, hey there. Good evening. I'm Patrick Wern, U.S. Marine working for the Army, so that's scary in itself. A little bit about what we do and what I do. I work for the U.S. Army's Combat Capability Development Command Ground Vehicle System Center. So what we do is anything with a wheel, track, or autonomous ground system, we do the R&D. My particular background, I do a little bit of startup engagement, work with the VC firms, and know a little bit about acquisition. So I'm going to turn it over to these three outstanding individuals, and they're going to introduce themselves, and then we'll get on with the evening.
Good evening. I'm Tim Fern. I'm an attorney up in Cohen-Saglius. Before I was an attorney, I was 22 years in the Army. Unlike Joseph and Kevin, I didn't have a tank. I was light infantry, and we walked with a plugger and a compass. So it would have been nice to have the FBCB2. So spent 15 years as an Army attorney, focusing really on government contract and fiscal law. Culminated in my last position. I was the department chair of the Judge Advocate General School. Teaching government and contract and fiscal law to all attorneys across the federal government. About 3,500 would come through every single year. And we've transitioned that into private practice. Wanted to thank Kevin and the TDIF team for having us down here, and thank Josh Barron, the Capital Factory. What we would like to do tonight is we would like to answer your questions. We congratulate you all for being here and on your success. And we want to be a part of that success and help you guys answer any questions that you might have about any of the topics we're going to cover.
Thank you, Tim.
My name is Jacqueline Talpa. I am here from Washington, D.C., where I am a consultant. I'm also a small business, woman-owned small business. So I represent sort of you guys, but I actually work with other small to medium sized businesses, mostly in the government and DoD sectors. And I help them evolve or grow their vertical markets. Been doing that overall over 20 years, and I'm very grateful to be here today. And I want to bring kind of the perspective from the trenches, if you would, from the actual small business perspectives and experiences that I have experienced through my clientele.
Hi, my name is Allie Young, and I also am an attorney at Cohen Seglius. I work with Tim. He's actually my boss. And I am in our government contracts practice, really just focusing on A to Z government contracts issues. I have also had a focus in small business procurement issues specifically. And so that is what I will be giving an overhead and discussion about tonight. And I'll get more in depth tomorrow about the different issues in that arena.
So before we get started, how many people in the room have actually had a contract with the government or done business for the government? Oh, wow. All right. We're in trouble. Let's throw that out the window. So I think we're going to start it off tonight. Let's kind of talk about the changes you've seen from the procurement standpoint as far as where we were, what happened, and where we're going, at least from your three perspectives.
Sure. So to get into the game, I think, is pretty easy, right? Everybody wants to talk about how do you get into government contracting, and really you need three things. You need your SAMS registration. To do your SAMS registration, you need your DUNS number and your cage code. I think that's the easy part. The harder part for folks is once you're in the game, you've got to know the policies and the procedures, and you've got to know your clientele. So before we get into that a little bit, who can tell me what your best advertising or marketing tool is? Please, go ahead. Okay, your best marketing tool is you. That's good. We've got, like at Cohen Seglius, they give us these great business cards. They're super thick. You drop it in, you get the free lunch. You can do all kinds of stuff with this. Everybody will say business card. All right, who else thinks besides you or your business card, what's your best marketing tool? Okay, your network, right? That gets you in the door. Your network's great. I would offer this. I think your best marketing tool is your proposal that you provide to the government, because it's the only snapshot that the government is going to see of what you and your company are capable of doing, all right? And we've seen a drastic sea change in federal procurement law over the last 20 years. Everything's gone from sealed bidding to negotiated procurements. You've seen a huge increase in small business contracting. And recently, what you've seen down here in Austin, Texas, is you've seen DIUX and you've seen Futures Command and all those other organizations that are dealing with OTAs. I was very fortunate in my last job. I worked very closely with Lou Chiarella, who was the attorney who helped set up Futures Command. I was at one point in time General Ed Cardone's lawyer. He was the individual who set it up and before they moved down here. And we provided attorneys to assist the cross-functional teams as they kind of worked through this process. So you've seen a drastic sea change in government contracting. You've got the Section 809 panel that's out there now that's radically revamping how contracts are done. And really at the end of the day, I think General Milley probably said it best, is the idea is to shorten the process and to get innovative technology to the warfighter. So you've seen those changes. You're going to see a lot of stuff come out of the Section 809 panel report. And I don't want to steal Allie's thunder because I think she might talk about that a little bit.
The world does always change, and I think we need to realize and adjust to it as business people, as business owners, and government contractors. So doing your homework is one of the best advice I would possibly give you. You have to understand not only your product or service that you're offering, but also the need for the application. You have to determine what is the best fit, what agency is the best fit, and why they should want you and your product. How do you make them really understand that you are the answer to whatever the problem is? And if you don't understand what their problems are, you won't be able to provide the answer. So really doing a lot of due diligence, whichever way you can. Anybody reads the forecasts for government agencies that you're targeting? Okay, that's where you start, right? Every year we have to, they are publicly available and they will be out there so you can find out what is the need for the different agencies that you're looking at. After you read the forecast, how do you go, okay, I have a great idea, they're looking for something like that. How do you go and actually interact with and whom? You have to determine who the stakeholders for that issue are. Do I contact the program manager? You can establish a great relationship with the program manager, and what happens next? You know, it has to go through procurement process, and there is a very, very long processes that have to take place, and we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, but it can be quite extensive, and unfortunately the procurement officers do not, or the purchasing departments don't usually have too strong of a relationship with the program directors, or their missions may be quite different, right? We always, in government contracting, have to look at the risk factors. So you have to show yourself and present your company and solution as the lowest possible risk. It will be about cost, it will be about pricing, but everybody is always worried about the risk. And you have to sell the least risk to the government. And it will have to be within the proposal, it has to be implemented, it has to be in there. We do not start proposals anymore with, like we used to, with, oh, we are a small business, 8A, you know, woman-owned, XYZ, we've been doing this for this many years, and our capabilities are mostly in data analytics, but some cloud. This is not what anybody is going to read, and it will get you any response, and it will get you through anything. You have to start with, you should hire us because we are your solution to this problem. So writing your proposals correctly, getting training on how to write proposals, getting help from the people who are highly versed in writing your proposals is a crucial point of planning your business. And the overall planning, business planning, having a business plan, I had a couple of conversations here earlier. I'm a huge proponent of, any business has to have a plan for it to fall back on and to be able to track. Everything in business world is scalable. Why are we in business? What are we trying to do? At the end, it always comes down to the money, right? We have to make money to survive. We have to be able to save money to the government or provide services at affordable cost. So it's really about the planning of how you get to the point where you need to be the best way. And finding that out, spending the time and following through the process, that whatever processes you put in place on follow-up is how you can run any enterprise, because it's about hard work, it's about continuation, it's about follow-through and follow-up that has to happen. And that will get you forward.
So, one of the biggest things that you keep hearing people talk about in government contracts is, the small business procurement. And one of the huge issues as to why that is very important and why it is a big deal to be considered a small business is the government has to set aside 23% of prime contracting dollars to small businesses. And so in 2017 alone, that was $105.7 billion that went to small businesses, which is a huge amount of opportunity. And the way that the government can meet, this requirement that they have to meet is set aside contracts. When they issue set aside contracts, only small businesses are able to compete for those. And then within small businesses, you can be woman-owned, 8A, hub zone. You've got your smaller, programs that even further diminishes your other competition. And so that's why we kind of come in and, we really emphasize the importance of that because it allows for a lot of opportunity. But it also allows for a lot of litigation because a lot of other companies will lose a contract and say, well, they're not small. They shouldn't qualify for this. And so there's a lot of regulations that are going on around here and what it actually means to be small, what it actually means to qualify for these programs. And there can be a lot of risk when you are certifying that you are a certain program and if you aren't actually qualified for it. And so I'd say that we're seeing, I guess, in the future, we're seeing a lot more partnering up with different companies. There's been, push with teaming. It's a way for small businesses to act as a subcontractor as well as a prime contractor. It's really working with other companies to take advantage of those small business set-aside contracts. And then tomorrow I'll be getting into a lot more specifics about the eligibility for those and the different types of programs.
I don't want to rain on Ellie's parade, but the Section 809 panel, where are all the small businesses at? Raise your hands if you're small. You guys need to get out your pens and paper and write your congressman. Because the Section 809 panel just released Volume 3 of their report, and in Volume 3 of the Section 809 panel report says essentially they're going to try to get rid of small business set-asides, right? So we're going to eliminate the 23%, and what they're trying to do then is small businesses would compete with large businesses, but they'd be given a 5% price preference. Now, how many small businesses can compete with large businesses at a 5% price preference? But that hasn't happened quite yet. So we're still at the 23% set aside, things are moving forward, but if you are a small business or involved in the small business community, you should be concerned and you should want to write your congressman and say, do not follow the Section 809 panel's recommendations. So the report came out and my department worked with the folks, Moshe Schwartz was essentially the head of the panel. And so Volume 1 and 2 came out, and Congress implemented almost all of their recommendations. Her question is, where was it at in the process? So Congress implemented almost all of the recommendations. You see the enhanced debriefing requirements that came out for DOD. Anybody who's done a DOD procurement is probably familiar with those, right? And the way that the Volume 3 was written is plug and play, essentially. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen because you're going to see some radical changes to how bid protests are done. DOD is supposed to implement their own system. But it's been written and published, and it's written in such a way that you can take that and it would become legislation pretty easily. Now, with all your bid protest stuff and most of your other recommendations, you're not going to see the pushback from industry. Where you're going to see the pushback from industry is when small businesses are involved, because not only do they get 23% of the dollars, but the majority of, and you hear all the politicians say this, right? The majority of the businesses in the United States are small businesses. So do I think those will be implemented? I don't know, but is it out there? Absolutely yes.
All right, so before we hear Allie's perspective on small business and some of the legal,
I don't think you're on, buddy. Nope. Oh, is he on? Oh, I'm sorry.
some of the legal challenges that might come with it, and then Jacqueline's perspective, from the trenches. Does everybody in here know what a PTAC is? Anybody? A couple? So I write that down. So PTAC is a Procurement Technical Assistance Center, and that's a free kind of a hybrid of federal and state funded, and they're there to help you get cage codes and all that wonderful, very overwhelming things that you're likely seeing as a small business. There's at least 100 of them in the nation, probably more.
Closest one from here is in San Antonio.
Okay, fair enough. I don't know that I can.
Just FYI.
Yeah, no, that's not terrible from a distance perspective. I mean, if you look at some of your more remote.
I have a client in Mississippi who says there are none in Mississippi, so.
I can't verify that, but something worth looking at, because that's free help provided to you to help you do business with the government. And for the most part, the 20 or so I've interacted with, they're very helpful and eager to help. So now I think we're going to have Allie kind of give the perspective from the small business world in what she's seeing.
I mean, like from like the legal perspective and how small businesses are taking advantage of the opportunities?
Yes.
Yeah. So like I alluded to, obviously there are these set-aside contracts. Step one is always going to be, you know, am I actually eligible? Am I actually small? What does being small mean? And a little plug for lawyers, we can come in and help you look through your corporate documents, look at what your revenues are, look at your employees, look at your NAICS codes, figure out what this small size standard is that's associated with your business. And then it's really ensuring that you are, you know, eligible to be small first, and then depending on whether you might qualify for a smaller program within the small business program, how can you get certified? Can you self-certify, or do you need the SBA to approve you? And then, you know, after that, working with what's best for your company. Setting up a team. Am I looking to be a prime? Am I looking to be a sub? What do I bring to the table? What do other companies bring to the table? Do I only want to be going after set-aside contracts, or do I want to be going after, you know, large prime contracts? Because you know, large businesses and non-set-aside contracts will also have small business subcontracting plan requirements. So large businesses are also looking to work with small businesses, both from a subcontractor and a prime contractor point of view. And so that's how I alluded earlier, is, you know, there's teaming opportunities, and where teaming kind of comes in play, and what we're seeing is, you know, a big thing for companies to keep in mind, whether they're acting as the prime or the sub, is something called flow down clauses. And I think Jacqueline's going to hit a little bit on this some more. But it's really understanding, what clauses do I need to be flowing down? What clauses is the government making sure that the subcontractor is doing? And also as a subcontractor, what clauses are being required to be flowed down to me? What are my obligations? What does the prime contract say? What am I agreeing to you know, be held liable for, essentially? And it's really paying attention to all of those nitty-gritty details that can be flowed down. And I think
So before we go into the trenches with Jacqueline, who's got questions?
Hi, my name is Tahado Martinez, and I am the CEO and founder of Cyber Warfighters Group, a cybersecurity consulting firm. So within dealing with contracts, are you guys really, do you have the resource of the HR component? So for example, there's a secret sauce that has to be on every contract, almost on every page, that helps the small business protect ourselves. I don't know what that secret sauce language is. There's a key language that has to be on every contract, and I'll follow up with you, Tim. And I just found out what it was when I was on the business trail. And so that's the one thing. That language, which I cannot think of the top of my mind, I could pour wines, but do you know what I'm speaking of? Number one, of that secret language that must be in every contract, every page, to protect the small business like myself. Number two, when I have 1099 employees all throughout all states, to find one source HR person, my challenge is finding an HR person who is diverse in the different state laws of what you must do with employees, and then I have people in Europe. Are you a one-stop shop to help us get that one compiled information?
So thank you so much for your question. Yeah, we certainly do everything associated with federal government contracting. You know, and I don't want to plug the law firm. That's not what I'm here to do. But we certainly do all that. To answer your initial question, you know, it's really, when you're contracting with the government, the rules are, you need to know not only the processes and the procedures, and they're going to vary by agency. If you're dealing with the Corps of Engineers, it's going to be different than if you're dealing with the Air Force. It's going to be different than you're dealing with the Army. Every agency does everything different. But when you're looking at the federal government contracting, except for OTAs, which we're going to talk about, the FAR is really your Bible. And the FAR, and then the supplements to that, the DFARs and so on down, are going to spell out all the rules and regulations and all the requirements that are supposed to be in there. And you need to know the language, and you need to know what you're required to put in your contracts. The biggest issue that folks face, again, it's easy to get into the game. You need three things, right? You need a register and SAM, you need a cage code, you need a DUNS number. And you can do that very, very easy. It's once you're in the game, how do you play by the rules? And as you start going through your formation piece, where we're trying to award contracts, And then after you get awarded a contract, you're just happy to get awarded the contract, right? And we'll talk about it a little bit later, I hope. But my big knock on what they're doing down here with Futures Command and DIUX is people are just happy to get these OTAs, and they take whatever the government gives them. They're supposed to be negotiated procurements, right? And I don't think folks necessarily negotiate that because I'm just happy to be in the game. So once you're in the game and you get the award of a contract, you got to know all your rules with regards to administration. What do we do if there's a change to the contract? What are my obligations as a contractor? Do I have to notify the government? When do I have to notify the government? What if there's a delay? What am I supposed to do? So there's all kinds of rules and regulations, and everything is driven really by the Federal Acquisition Regulation and kind of how that all plays out. Is that fair? All right.
So we can maybe do one.
Yes, sir.
I don't think so. There's no such thing. There's a person, right? If it's a company, it's one person. That's definitely big enough. So from the perspective, yeah, there is rules, regulations, and there is the real life and what happens with small businesses when they enter this world. You do have to learn the government language. It's a language. I'm originally from Europe. I speak several languages. One of them is Gov. Okay, so you do have to understand. You have to understand what the RFPs, RFQs, requests for proposals or quotations are actually saying, what they're asking, and how to answer it. Please do seek help. When you're growing, when you're expanding, whatever you're trying to do, you're going to be so much better if you ask people who already know. There is resources from the PTACs and there's other small business offices. Every agency actually has a small business liaison. Do utilize their help. I get a lot out of them when I whine at them. Okay, I'm a good whiner. So I go on behalf of my clients and I will actually talk intensely with the small business advocate at an agency or at a large company, and I hold them accountable for what their job is, which is to promote small business inclusion within the procurement process. The large companies have a requirement to bring in at least, we have the percentages of small business that they are required to bring. Unfortunately, the experiences quite often have been that, yes, oh great, I'm a sub to Leidos, I'm going for it, I'm in the world, or name them large, right? And then when it comes to the award, if you're a sub, only the large is actually allowed to or talks to the program officers. Okay, so you don't know what's happening with the program. You don't know how it's progressing. You're waiting for the task order to come to you to give you your portion of the work. And then you hear from the large, oh, sorry, they cut it a little bit here, they cut it a little bit there. We're just not gonna, yeah, thanks a lot. We're going to kind of cover that. There's just not that space. And what do you do as a small, right? What do you do? And this has been the experiences that a lot, unfortunately, do happen. So understanding what the large is doing, understanding the program, understanding where you actually matter and where you're better than anybody else. And whether it's the government itself or whether it's the large company, you have to have something to sell and you have to define it very, very clearly. It cannot be, I do IT services. I don't know what that means. It's just too broad. I call it vanilla IT. There is, 6,000 8A vanilla IT companies within the beltway of Washington, D.C., where I am. 6,000 of them, okay? Vanilla IT 8A, which is a set-aside, great. Vanilla IT is not gonna get you anywhere. You gotta specify, you gotta figure out what you wanna do.
So I think Allie can probably expand on this a little bit more. So if you're a one-person shop, you get into the game, you've got to understand what your subcontracting rules are because there are certain limitations on. So essentially, you're going to either have to perform all. Okay, so if you're a two-person shop, right? So you've got to understand what your rules are because there are certain limitations. Did you want to cover the rules real quick?
Yeah. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. When you're in a JV, you have, like when you're partnering with another company to set up another company, joint venture, sorry. I want to say that if that joint venture wants to subcontract to the large, if you want to use your large business partner and subcontract to them, it's like the small business has 40, but they have to perform 40% of the work. And then I'm trying to think off the top of my, I have them on my slides for tomorrow.
So I think what you're looking at is if you're in a construction industry, you got to self-perform 15%, there's 85%. If you're not in a construction industry, you got to perform over 50% of the work. So you just need to really be cognizant of what you're doing and how you're getting into it. But there's size, if you could do it if you can perform the work. There's no limitation how big you are.
Ma'am?
Speaking on teaming, when larger businesses use your strong, small set-asides that has all the alphabets behind their name, but like for example, when you get into a Navy tool, we all know what the Navy tool is, and that's just to get into the building. But then you're waiting for the task orders, and they want that access to the building before they can come into this room. So before they can get into this room, from a legal standpoint, is it worth a small business resources to say, oh, lessons learned, I can't wait to get out this marriage, this teaming agreement? Or is it beneficial for us to fight the fight when we know that that opportunity was won based on our past performances as a small company?
All right, what you're talking about is two very, very different things, okay? There's a teaming agreement and there's a subcontract agreement, okay? So if we're in a teaming agreement, what that means is me and you have agreed that we're gonna prepare a proposal and submit it to the government, okay? Together, and you're gonna provide me certain information, I'm gonna provide you certain information, there's probably gonna be a non-disclosure agreement, all kinds of great stuff that goes with that. Those are typically going to be governed by state law, depending on where you're at. I live in Philadelphia. I work in Philadelphia. My family still lives in Virginia. If you are in a teaming agreement in Virginia, you're kind of in a bad place. All right. So all a teaming agreement is it says we have agreed to enter into a proposal and work together. All right. Once the contract's awarded, it's going to go to the prime contractor, and then the prime contractor and its teaming partner will have to enter into a subcontract agreement. Those are two very, very different things. So let's say we have a teaming agreement, we enter into it, we go ahead and the prime gets the contract. If the prime doesn't award to the sub, there's very, very little that the sub can do depending on the language of the teaming agreement. All right, certain states will interpret that different ways. So essentially a teaming agreement is we will agree to try to negotiate a contract. The more specificity you put in your teaming agreement, like the subcontract terms and all your exclusivity clauses, we're going to have an exclusive relationship. If awarded the contract, I will, not we will negotiate, right? Very specific language in the teaming agreement generally equates to a better subcontract. I have a client of mine who entered into a teaming agreement with a company where they agreed to split the profits on this 50-50. It was not a good situation. They never entered into a subcontract agreement. She called me up in a state of panic. She says, I've been paying this money for 6 months. What should I do? I said, did you ever enter into a subcontract agreement? I'm pretty sure we didn't negotiate that for you. And she said, no. I said, stop paying him. Well, he's going to sue me. Based off what? It's an agreement to try to enter into a subcontract agreement. If there's no subcontract agreement, there's no subcontract agreement. So you need to be very, very careful with your teaming agreements. You want to be very, very specific. You want to, if you can, have an attachment of the subcontract that's associated with that. And language matters, and your state law matters. If you're in Virginia, the Virginia courts are not going to uphold a teaming agreement. If you're in Maryland, it's a different ballgame. There's other different kinds of rules, but you need to look at your state law with regards to that. Did that get you? Oh, and follow up, sir.
So if we want to use you, and we're a small business, and we want to team with a larger partner, what's the approximate cost?
Everybody always asks a lawyer, it's the approximate cost. And I'm going to give the typical lawyer answer. It really depends. So we do a lot of different things for small businesses, and we try to keep costs down as much as we can because we realize legal services are generally cost prohibitive, right? So what we do as a firm is we will walk through, the first thing we would do is enter into an engagement letter, which would allow us to enter into an attorney-client relationship, which we're required to do under the professional rules of engagement. And then we would talk about your specific issues. And we would tell you how long it would take to resolve those issues and essentially what we think it would cost. I have tried very, very hard to build a clientele based on trust and long-lasting relationships with clients. And so for me, you will never, ever have a surprise in your bill. We'll never perform work that you didn't want to perform or you didn't specifically authorize us to perform. And if I tell you something's only going to cost so much, that's all it's going to cost. So if Allie or I work on it for 20 hours, and she'll attest to this, I think, and we told you 2 hours, we're only billing you for 2 hours. So it really depends on the complexity of your issues. We do subcontract agreements all the time. We do teaming agreements all the time. I can typically take something like that and, depending on what area you're in, and resolve it fairly quickly, 4 hours or so usually.
Okay, so under 10,000.
Oh, yeah. So for a teaming agreement, yeah, absolutely, way under $10,000. Yes, sir.
I have slightly different experience with some of the teaming. I have teamed on multiple large DoD contractors I've been prime with them sub to me. And what I found is, as the small business, if I can maintain relationships inside the client, I oftentimes have more experience than the larger teaming prime on there too. And I think in addition to doing the legal part, establishing those relationships are very, very important to most small businesses moving into the DoD or the Intel world for the first time.
Well, I absolutely agree with you. I think relationships are absolutely important. I worked for General Butch Tate, and he would always say, "It's all good until it isn't." And then it goes downhill. And the biggest thing I see with teaming agreements, honestly, and I'll let Jacqueline weigh on this as well, is the equity of bargaining power. So if you're a small and you're trying to team with a large prime, sometimes they're just going to tell you, "Hey, here's our teaming agreement," and you're stuck with it. And if you want to get in the game, you're going to be stuck with it.
We even were in the DoD Mentor Protege program with two of the larger primes and two different agencies as well. But the relationship with this was so important to me. It even helped me the one time I did a bid protest up at Fort Meade and won the bid protest against one of the big guys. So the relationships is
Absolutely, it's all about relationships, and it's about being able to get to the customer, right? Because understanding what their needs are and such. I mean, you obviously were describing a different scenario than I described earlier when you were the prime, which that's the fantastic situation to be in, because then you're calling the shots. Whenever you are the prime, you're calling the shots, and having the big boy behind you helps you win the contract and helps you perform properly on that contract. The issue quite often is that if you're just starting, you're starting new business, and you're like, okay, so I have these skills, I have these abilities, and there is this RFP that just came out, and I'm perfect for that. I'm perfect for that. And it was just set aside as a small business. Wonderful, so I can go after that. And it was originally, there was, again, one of your large companies that were the contract holders who is the incumbent. Oh, so I'm small, so I may be a risk to the government because I don't have much past performance. I'm kind of lacking on that side, so I want to bring in the large company that has been the prime. What happens in that situation? Unless you have relationship within that large company already established, they already have a small business that's waiting, or they have groomed and they have taught, and so it just kind of becomes, and I will be talking about it more as a catch-22. In a lot of these situations, how do you get ahead of that cycle? Because I can do this, but I can't show that I've done it. how do I do it? How can I bid on anything if I haven't done it yet? And it just goes through that. So there are solutions. I mean, there are solutions to everything, but understanding what the problem is and figuring out what the business plan is, what the plan of action is. How do I overcome that? How, you know, every business has to go through this course of failures, right? To grow, any business has to go through failures. So whatever it is, if you do your technology advancement, right? You've tried this prototype, you've tried this, and it didn't work because something didn't go right. Same thing happens with business growth and your government contracting. You shall fail and embrace the failure that happens, which is a lot of times, if you understand the proposition, you understand the customer, it's a go, no go in government lingo, right? Go, no go. Yeah, you failed, you can't bid on it, but guess what? If you determine that early, you haven't invested a lot of time and money into trying to pursue that and form relationship that's maybe will not work out because there already is something else in place. So really looking at, I mean, what is the difference between BD and capture? Do you understand that? That's a huge difference with government contracting them from any commercial situation or industry, as government would call that. Because industry has BD, business development. We find new opportunities, you pursue them, you go after them. However, capture is a very different animal and how that works within that space. Right.
So a quick question for the lawyers.
Oh, again.
Is a teaming agreement a contract or an offer/LOI?
I mean, it's a contract, but you're contracting to contract essentially. So, you know, the contract is if I'm awarded this contract, we will be working together, and that's what Tim was getting at about having your specifics in there and making sure that it's drafted in such a way that says we will be doing this, and this is the work that we will be doing under this contract. That way, that's how you can make your teaming agreements more enforceable, and that's where your state law does come in. But
Well, I just want to make sure, because those are very different things.
Right, yes, and so the biggest issue I see, and I see it repeatedly with teaming agreements, is exclusivity. If you're going to team with a large contractor, make sure they're not teaming with your competitors, okay? So they'll team with you, they'll team with you, they'll team with you, they're gonna get the contract, or you're gonna get the contract and sub to them, and they don't care. You want the exclusivity clause in there to protect yourself is the biggest issue. Sir, you don't have to take notes. We will send you slides, all kinds of stuff.
I was wondering about, because you were talking about NDAs with teaming and everything, but what about when you're dealing with the government, if there's some new type of IP and you are going to, do they work with NDAs? I mean,
It depends on your type of contract. So I would offer this to you. So all your standard FAR-based contracts, all your IP stuff's going to be covered by BIDOL, essentially. The BIDOL, Evan By, Bob Dole, yeah, he was, yeah, they wrote the legislation. So it's BIDOL is the legislation. That's going to cover all your intellectual property stuff. Most of the time, the government's going to want the intellectual property. There's not a lot of leeway in FAR-based contracts to negotiate that.
SBIR, if you already have the IP and patents and stuff, do you want that?
So yes. So here's your problem as a small business. A lot of small businesses, IP is your entire business, or data rights are your entire business. When you get into when you get into the OTAs, you have essentially 7 different clauses that you want to negotiate through that aren't flow-down clauses. The government will always start with the OTAs with BIDOL as the default, okay? But you want to be able to negotiate that because again, a lot of the time, what you're dealing with is IP is the entire business, especially for some of the small tech businesses. Does that answer your question?
So basically, they'll start with that, but you just go back and renegotiate. You say, but it's kind of a chicken and egg. You want to show them, look, I have this technology.
That's right.
You don't want to. They're not going to sign an NDA.
And sometimes the government may not be interested at all in your technology. A lot of it, again, given the typical lawyer answer, right, is it depends on what the government wants to do with it. But oh, right, yeah. Pre-award, they're not going to retain your IP. It's when you're awarded the contract and you're working through it. During the formation, you're okay. During the administration, if you create a product, they're going to own it. Yeah.
the IP. They want to give you the grant money. And
Are you good on this, Silver?
now STTR is different. The technology transfer, they'll want to
Right.
keep that.
Yes.
But for small business, SBIR specifically,
I'm gonna defer to my SBI. No, you don't know that. So I don't know. We'll have to get an answer back to you. There's restrictions on it. Yeah. So
On whether your bid response is classified or unclassified.
Right.
there you
And
go.
on
Thank
the
you.
agency as well, because the Army has a little different set. It depends if it's classified or unclassified, and it will depend on which agency is actually proposing the SBIR or in charge of it, because the Army has a little bit different rules than the Navy and such. So it depends on the
sorry,
situation.
in the meeting tomorrow, I looked online, I couldn't see where you registered, it just said add to your calendar.
Just talk to Kevin. Or just show up.
Yes, sir.
I was going to kind of dovetail off that, where I just got done doing capstone for my MBA program, and part of it is actually very careful about soliciting information from current, members in the service, right? Because you can't ask about capabilities or, weaknesses or anything like that. So, can you explain the importance of the executive order? Was it 12-232, where you can't solicit current members? Is that ever?
So I think what you're dealing with right there deals with organizational conflicts of interest mostly, right? So you've essentially got three different types of organizational conflicts of interest, and what you're dealing with is really superior knowledge. And so there are lots of ways you can work through that. Contracting officers are required to identify early. You're required as a contractor to identify any actual or potential OCIs, and then you can mitigate those, right? So depending on what your situation is, the contracting officer has to consider your mitigation plan. So you certainly couldn't solicit information. I couldn't provide you information as a government employee that's going to help you get a contract. That's a problem. But let's say I was a former government employee. I came to work for you. I'd worked on a particular contract. You could still compete for that if we put in some kind of develop some kind of mitigation plan. You'll see people say fencing off, walling off. I'm not involved in any way, shape, or form in the contract. You could still compete on that, but that becomes a little bit difficult to do. If you ever run into the situation, I've published some stuff on OCIs. I'm happy to send it to you if you want to give me a card afterwards. And again, the key to OCIs is you are allowed to develop a mitigation plan, and the contracting officer has to consider your mitigation plan. If they don't consider your mitigation plan, you can file a bid protest. You're going to win the bid protest. There are some things that can't be mitigated, though, and really when you're dealing with it is if the person you're hiring or you as a subcontractor or contractor were involved in developing the evaluation criteria. You can't develop the evaluation criteria for a contract that you're going to bid on, right? That makes sense. So you got to kind of work through that a little bit, depending on what your particular situation is, but there are ways to do it.
I just wasn't smart enough, like, with UNs or UNs and going to, like, Fed Biz Docs. I just wasn't as smart on that.
Get a card from me. I'll shoot you some.
How are we doing on?
If there's more questions, take another 5 minutes for questions or so, and then have everybody wrap up.
Anybody else got any burning questions?
Sure.
What's the best resource on FAR? I mean, of course, you can read the statutes.
The best resource on the FAR is the FAR, right? No. You said you were coming down tomorrow. What we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to really try to hit on some different areas that we think are going to be important to you. We're going to talk. I'm bringing in the heaviest hitter I know, my partner Michael Payne. He's been doing this longer than I've been alive. Both of us have extensive government experience, and we approach things from the government's perspective with regards to it. We're going to talk to you about the basics of government contracting, not only how to get in the game, but all the different pieces with your different FAR parts that are important to you. We're going to talk you through what you need to know after a contract is formed through the administration and some of the important contract provisions. And then we're going to kind of tailor into some small business stuff. We're going to hit those different areas and some of those different requirements. We're going to talk about non-traditional contracting methods like OTAs, CIBR, TTR. And then we're going to hit cybersecurity. ITAR is a big one that we're going to talk about, export control. And then I think I'm going to go, and hopefully we'll have time, I want to talk a little bit about bid protest, because you need to know what to do if you don't get a contract, right? And I want to talk about REAs and claims because I've seen too many clients leave money on the table because they're afraid to do anything about it. So your best resource for a FAR, honestly, is getting an education in some way, shape, or form. She said there was no PTACs here that are close in San Antonio. Go online, watch their webinars. Everybody does a webinar. I do webinars once a week, it feels like. And you can get the resources, and so your best thing is like that spidey sense. This doesn't feel right, it doesn't sound right. Let me just talk to somebody. Reach out to the folks here, that's why you're here. Reach out to the PTACs, reach out to your other resources, and if you got a problem, call somebody, call a lawyer, call a law firm, call a consultant, would be your best bet. Sir.
My company specializes in the SIBR Phase 3 process, setting up those contracts, and we've noticed that we're kind of treated like unicorns when we bring up the SIBR Phase 3. Not a lot of government knows how the process works, and there's a lot of pressure coming from Congress to commercialize the SIBR Phase 1s and 2s to the Phase 3. So what do you guys view as some of the biggest obstacles to commercialize that, shiny new rock that we're creating in the prototype?
So I'll take that one. Throw the darts at the government here. So we are familiar with your company or the process. Let me rephrase that. We are familiar with the Phase 3 process, and at the moment we are still, it looks great, it sounds great, we're still exploring it, but like our biggest challenge, at least on my end, is getting it through the typical wickets you have to go through, such as legal, because, well, we've never done this before, so therefore it can't be right. So we're working through that now. I think it's Patrick's opinion only. Very promising, and it could be a great procurement method, for some solutions, not all. Just like an OT is not for everything, a SIBR Phase 3 certainly isn't for everything as well. There's a particular method to acquire things, and you just need to use the right one.
It seems like there's a lot of new procurement vehicles going in place right now, like the one at DTIC and the one at DTRL going. There's one that's made it through multiple congressional hearings now that's forming a new NQTEL-like funding vehicle, but within the services side. What do you think are the prospects of those moving forward during this current session? Or the one like Ben is working on at your place?
Yeah, we may take that one offline. That might be a lengthy discussion.
I would say acquisition reform is here, and in the federal government, having spent 22 years there, you see the pendulum swing from one end to the other. Right, so we've got all your different rules and regulations that have been put in place over the years, has really slowed down the process. And especially within DOD is the big driver behind this. General Milley, give me a credit card, I'll go to Cabela's, I'll outfit every soldier, sailor, and airman with a gun tonight. And Congress heard that and says, we want rapid acquisition. And so you've seen some of these expanded authorities. That's why we have the Section 809 panel. How can we fix this? So what's the likelihood of success with some of those programs coming through? I would say, given the flavor of the month, there's some probability. But again, I think it's probably a longer answer that's probably best suited offline. Is that fair? All right, I think we got time for one more question because I need a beer.
Very quickly, suppose you wrote your own PWS, you wrote your own SOW, and you wrote the metrics, and because you invented a service that the United States Army decided it required. What would you recommend, given the, to scale up such a service? Would it be to go to the like type of users and contract officers, across Army, or would you suggest, something totally different?
Do you want that? Sure.
So it would probably really depend what the plan originally was. when you wrote the SOW and PWS, if that was really just for that agency, if it was just for a particular problem that is there, then you would have to see if there is a similar situation in other agencies that it would work for. And I would, as it is going through, then that would be a really good precedent for you that this is already in place, it's working here, and once you get a past performance on it, obviously, then you can, and then it's very easy, trying to get to somebody else, say, hey, because they love hearing that. When you say, okay, I am doing it over here, it's okay, it is safe, because somebody has already bought it, so you can buy it, yes. So I would say, yeah, just identifying very, what your verticals would be in that situation, but you have the pieces together, so it's a very good product to sell, I would say. Anybody else?
Again, that process will still take a long time, though.
Yes.
Yeah. So, all right. Anybody else before we wrap it up here? All right. Well, hey, thanks again to Kevin and Brandon and all the folks at TDIF. I think we still have some slots available tomorrow if folks want to come. We don't care if the room is full. We're happy to talk to everybody. We're happy to answer questions. We do have some guidelines on how we're going to go tomorrow, outlines, but we're certainly willing to deviate into other certain areas. So thank you so much, and thank you, Patrick, for mediating. I appreciate it.